April 13th, 1953. Washington, D.C. CIA Director Allen Dulles sits at his desk and signs a secret order. He approves a project that will become the darkest chapter in American history. A project that effectively declares war on the human mind. The budget is 6% of the entire CIA operating budget. The goal is terrifyingly simple: to control human behavior. They want to create a Manchurian Candidate, a programmed assassin who can kill on command and then forget he ever did it. They want to discover a truth serum, a drug that can force any Soviet spy to spill his secrets, and they are willing to break every law of God and man to get it. Welcome to the Shadow Dossier. Today we open the classified file on Project MK Ultra. This is not a conspiracy theory, this is a documented fact. To understand MK Ultra, you have to understand the panic of the 1950s. The Korean War had just ended. American prisoners of war were coming home, but something was wrong with them. They were confessing to crimes they didn't commit. They were praising communism. They seemed robotic, hollow. The CIA was convinced that the Soviets and the Chinese had mastered brainwashing. They believed the enemy had a secret weapon that could hack the human brain. The CIA decided they needed to catch up. They needed to master the mind first. To run this program, they didn't choose a soldier. They chose a chemist. His name was Sidney Gottlieb. He was known as the Black Sorcerer and the Dirty Trickster. He was a paradox. He lived in a cabin without running water. He milked goats. He meditated. But by day, he was the chief poison maker for the CIA. Gottlieb believed that to rebuild the human psyche, you first had to destroy it. You had to wipe the slate clean. You had to shatter the ego. His weapon of choice was a newly discovered drug called LSD. In the early 50s, LSD was unknown to the public. It was colorless, odorless, and tasteless. Gottlieb believed LSD was the key to the universe. He ordered the CIA to buy the entire world's supply of the drug from Sandoz laboratories in Switzerland. He paid $240,000. He brought it back to the US and began to hand it out like candy. But they couldn't just test it on volunteers. Volunteers might hold back. They needed to test it on people who didn't know they were being tested. This was the core crime of MK Ultra. They experimented on the unwitting, people who could not fight back, prisoners, mental patients, drug addicts, prostitutes, and sometimes their own colleagues. Let's look at the tragedy of Frank Olson. Frank Olson was a biological weapons expert for the US Army at Fort Detrick. He was a family man, a patriot. He worked on anthrax and toxins. In November 1953, he attended a CIA retreat at a cabin in Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. Sidney Gottlieb was there. He brought a bottle of Cointreau. Secretly, he spiked the bottle with a massive dose of LSD. Frank Olson had a drink. 20 minutes later, the world melted. He fell into a state of psychosis. He was terrified. He couldn't distinguish reality from hallucination. The trip didn't end when the drug wore off. Olson sank into a deep depression. He told his wife he had made a terrible mistake. He wanted to resign. He wanted to get out. But the CIA couldn't let him go. He knew too much. They took him to New York City, ostensibly for psychiatric treatment. They checked him into the Hotel Statler. Room 1018A. On the night of November 28, 1953, Frank Olson went through the window. He fell 13 stories to the sidewalk below. He died instantly. The CIA called it a suicide. They told his family he fell or jumped. For decades, the family believed Frank had a nervous breakdown. It wasn't until the 1970s that the truth came out. Frank Olson was the first victim of the MK Ultra drug trials, but forensic evidence found later suggested he might have been stunned and thrown out. Was it a bad trip? Or was it a murder to silence a man who wanted to quit? Frank Olson was just one man. The CIA needed more data. They needed to test LSD in real-world situations. They launched Operation Midnight Climax. It sounds like a cheap pulp novel, but it was real. The CIA set up safe houses in San Francisco and New York. They hired prostitutes on the CIA payroll. The prostitutes were ordered to pick up men in bars, regular guys, sailors, businessmen, tourists. They would bring the men back to the safe house. They would slip LSD into their drinks, and then the nightmare would begin. Behind a two-way mirror, CIA agents sat drinking martinis and watching. They filmed the men going insane. They watched how they reacted to sex, to fear, to interrogation while tripping. They called it field research. It was essentially state-sponsored torture. The victims were never told what happened. They woke up the next morning with no memory or with shattered minds. They went back to their lives, thinking they had gone crazy. The CIA felt this was justified. They argued that if the Russians invaded, they needed to know how to disable a population. But the experiments didn't stop at drugs. They moved into the realm of psychological torture. They funded a psychiatrist in Montreal named Dr. Ewen Cameron. Dr. Cameron was the president of the World Psychiatric Association, a respected man. But secretly, he was running Sub-Project 68 for the CIA. His institute, the Allen Memorial Institute, became a house of horrors. Cameron believed he could cure mental illness by depatterning the brain. He wanted to erase the patient's personality and build a new one. Patients came to him for mild depression or anxiety, postpartum depression, work stress, normal problems. Instead of therapy, they got hell. Cameron put them into a drug sleep. He used barbiturates to keep them in a coma for weeks, sometimes months. While they slept, he played tape recordings under their pillows. The tapes repeated the same phrases hundreds of thousands of times. "You are worthless. You killed your mother. You are nothing." This was called psychic driving. When they woke up, he used electroshock therapy, but not normal shock therapy. He used voltages 20 to 40 times higher than the standard safe limit. He shocked them 2 or 3 times a day. He reduced them to a vegetable state. Patients forgot their names. They forgot how to walk. They forgot how to eat. They had to be potty trained like infants. Then one woman, the wife of a Canadian member of Parliament, came in for mild anxiety. She left without her memory of her husband or her children. She spent the rest of her life unable to recognize her own family. The CIA paid for this. They wanted to know, can we wipe a brain? The answer was yes, you can wipe a brain, but you cannot put it back together. You only leave a broken shell. MKUltra spread its tentacles everywhere. It funded research at 80 different institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons. Top universities like Harvard, Stanford, and Columbia took CIA money. At Harvard, they ran a psychological experiment on undergraduates. They humiliated the students. They attacked their egos to see how they would break. One of the students in that experiment was a brilliant young mathematician. He was sensitive. He was vulnerable. His name was Ted Kaczynski. Years later, he would move to a cabin in the woods. He would start building bombs. He would become known as the Unabomber. Many historians believe that the CIA's psychological torture at Harvard broke Kaczynski. They created the monster they were trying to fight. Another famous experiment involved the Boston mob boss, Whitey Bulger. He was in prison in Atlanta. He volunteered for a program to reduce his sentence. They gave him LSD every day for months. He later described it as a living nightmare. He said he saw the faces of demons in the walls. He said he felt his mind fracturing into 1,000 pieces. He wrote in his diary, "I was in the hospital for a cure, and they gave me a disease." Whitey Bulger became one of the most violent, psychopathic killers in mafia history. Did the LSD create the psychopath? Or did it just unleash him? The scope of MKUltra is almost impossible to comprehend. They tested hypnosis. They tried to program people to plant bombs. They tested sensory deprivation tanks. They tested magic mushrooms brought back from Mexico. They even tested aerosol sprays in the New York City subway. They released bacteria to see how it would spread through the crowds. They treated the American public like lab rats. By the early 1970s, the political winds were changing. The Watergate scandal had shaken the country. People didn't trust the government. The director of the CIA, Richard Helms, saw the storm coming. In 1973, he gave a panicked order, "Destroy the files." He ordered all documents related to MKUltra to be shredded. Thousands of boxes, millions of pages, records of names, doses, results, and deaths, all turned to confetti. Helms wanted to bury the past. He almost succeeded, but he missed a spot. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request found a cache of documents. They were financial records, budget files stored in a different warehouse. 20,000 pages survived. They didn't have the patient names, but they had the receipts. They had the payments to Dr. Cameron. They had the payments for the LSD. The Senate formed a committee to investigate. The Church Committee. Senator Frank Church brought the CIA directors to testify. For the first time, the American public heard the words MK Ultra. They heard about the brothels. They heard about the poisons. They heard about the dart guns and the toxins. Sidney Gottlieb was called to testify. He was granted immunity. He admitted to everything, but he showed no remorse. He said it was a time of war. He said the survival of the nation was at stake. He retired to his farm. He spent his final years working with dying patients in a hospice. A strange end for a man who spent his life inventing ways to kill and destroy. The victims of MK Ultra never got real justice. The Canadian government eventually paid a small settlement to the victims of Dr. Cameron. The U.S. government paid the family of Frank Olson, but thousands of others suffered in silence. People who went crazy for no reason. People who lost their memories. We will never know the full death count. We will never know how many suicides were actually bad trips engineered by the agency. The legacy of MK Ultra is a permanent scar on the American psyche. It destroyed the trust between the citizen and the state. It fueled generations of conspiracy theories. But the saddest part is that the experiments were a failure. They never found a truth serum. LSD was too unpredictable. It made people hallucinate, not confess. They never created a Manchurian Candidate. The human mind is too resilient. It breaks, but it cannot be easily reprogrammed. All the suffering, all the ruined lives, it was all for nothing. The CIA officially claims that all mind control experiments stopped in 1973. They say they have strict ethical guidelines now. But skeptics ask a simple question. If they were willing to do this in the 50s, what are they doing now? Technology has advanced. We understand the brain much better. We have neurological implants. We have advanced pharmaceuticals. We have AI. Is MK Ultra really dead? Or did it just go deeper underground? Did it just change its name? When you hear about advanced interrogation techniques at Guantanamo Bay. When you hear about sonic weapons causing Havana syndrome. You are hearing the echoes of Sidney Gottlieb. You are hearing the ghosts of Room 1018A. The search for control never ends. Power always seeks a way to hack the human soul. MK Ultra proved that the government is capable of absolute moral darkness. It proved that national security can be used to justify absolute evil. We look back at it now as history. But for the victims trapped in the eternal twilight of a broken mind, it is not history. It is a nightmare that never ends. The file on MK Ultra is technically closed, but the questions remain open. Did they stop because it didn't work? Or did they stop because they found something better, something quieter, something invisible? We may never know. This concludes the file on Project MK Ultra. We have seen the mind control, the assassinations, and the atomic traitors. But the Cold War was primarily a war of technology, a war of planes flying so high they could not be shot down. Until one day they were. Next time, we open the file on the Dragon Lady, the U-2 spy plane, a camera in the sky that could read a license plate from 70,000 feet, and the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, who didn't take his suicide pill. He fell from the sky into the hands of the KGB and became a pawn in the greatest hostage swap in history.